Good morning, everyone. This is something I've always wanted to do. Donald Patterson. Please sit down, we're beginning. So for those of you who are not here and are watching from elsewhere, that was my father, and still my father, and I got to tell him to sit down. It feels like a special day. Hello everyone, I'm so glad you are here. Welcome to Sunday Forum at Plymouth Church. Whether you are one of the dozen people in the room or watching from home, we are glad that you are here. A few things before we begin. Dean Current is our presenter today, and I'll tell you a bit more about him in a moment. And he was supposed to be here, but out of caution and he decided he wasn't feeling great, so he decided to spare us the possibility and stay home. So thank you, Dean, for being aware of yourself. He will present for a little while, and then there will be a time for questions and answers. Those of you in the room, there's a microphone here for you to ask the questions so Dean can hear them. And then those of you at home, there are two ways that you can ask questions. In the function at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there is something called Q&A. Write your questions in there. You can start writing them as soon as you have them, and they'll be saved, and then I can be your voice and read them out to Dean. Or if you would like to ask the question yourself, you can raise your hand, and then Cody will allow you to be seen and heard for all of us. And then the chat function is where you can talk to Cody, who is running our tech, or each other. But please do not put questions in the chat because I won't be looking for them there. All right. I'd ask if you understand, but I'm just going to assume you're all nodding at me. So our presenter today, our guest, our friend, and he happens to be my uncle. Hi, Dean. There you are. It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
I'm going to talk about you for a second, Dean, and then you can talk to us.
All right.
All right.
Sounds
Dean
good.
Current, Dr. Current. How often do people call you doctor?
Not that often, I guess, which I like. I'm in Guatemalan Dr. Dean.
So please. So not Dr. Dean Current, but Dr. Current. It has a PhD in natural resource economics and master's degrees in forest economics and anthropology. He is director of the Center for Integrated Natural Resources and Agricultural Management, easily shortened to CINRAM, at the University of Minnesota. He has over 40 years of experience in Latin America, South and Southeast Asia, and the United States working on issues related to the sustainable management of agriculture and natural resources and the associated livelihood impacts. The focus of his work has been exploring ways to combine improved local livelihoods with conservation in agricultural and forested landscapes. He has been working with local forest community Concessions and the Rainforest Alliance in the Maya Biosphere Reserve for the past 17 years. A major focus of the work has been the Eco Palms program, which if you have been to first service today, you held one. If you're going to second service, you will get one. And you'll learn more about it now. Starting with a few communities, the program has expanded to encompass a growing number of communities and improving livelihoods and helping to conserve the Maya Biosphere Reserve. So, Dr. Uncle Dean, welcome. We look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you for being here.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Seth. That was a great introduction. Appreciate it. Yeah, and thank you all for being here as well. This is something, it's one of my favorite topics to talk about. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I've got some slides to show you to help explain a little bit what we do in Guatemala. Let me get those up. Yeah, so as Seth explained, and we're going to be talking about eco-palms today. And we see it as an approach to address poverty and sustainable development through partnerships. So I think it's a way to use the forest in a sustainable manner, but the church partnerships with the private public sector have been extremely important to make this work. The palms we're talking about, I'll talk more about them a little bit later, but it's the genus Commanderea. They grow in the natural forests in Guatemala and the Maya Biosphere Reserve. They're harvested by local folks, generally men. Then they're sorted and packaged by women. And then once they're put together, they're sent on to the US or Europe or whatever the final destination is. But if for the eco palms, they go to churches and they're used for Palm Sunday services. And as Seth mentioned, we really look at this, and we've always looked at this as a way to promote community-based management of natural resources and the conservation of those resources, but also development for those communities, improving livelihoods. Yeah, a little bit about the Guatemalan context. It's the 5th poorest economy in Latin America and the Caribbean. 6th highest rate of chronic malnutrition in the world and the highest in Latin America. Gross enrollment in secondary schools is 65%, the lowest in Central America. And it's one of the countries in the Northern Triangle. And these are the areas where a lot of the migrants to our southern border are coming from. Although I'll explain later, in the areas that we're working, not so many. Location, if you look in the Caribbean here, there's Guatemala, Mexico, Belize, Honduras over here. And then again, and it's northern Guatemala, which you'll see here. And if you look at this map of Guatemala, there aren't many roads up there. This is a large forest area, an important forest area, actually globally as well as regionally, but relatively isolated communities. A lot of the population of Guatemala is in the southern part of the country. So they do have issues with infrastructure because of that. And also, opportunities for income generation and employment. It is part of the Mesoamerican biological corridor, and Central America represents 0.5% of the Earth's surface, but about 7% of the biological diversity. So this is part of that corridor that connects North and South America. Very important as we talk about things like climate adaptation, adaptation in general for plants and animals that move through these corridors. If they're cut off, that eliminates some of the opportunities for adaptation. So again, it is fairly important regionally, but as I said, also globally. And this is the area we're talking about again. And so we're working with forest concessions in the Maya Biosphere Reserve. And this was a pretty interesting program that was set up by the government, which I'll go into a little more detail later. But I want to provide some background on the Biosphere Reserve. It's northern Guatemala, Mexico, and Belize. So that was the center of the Mayan civilization in Central America. It contains 83% of Guatemala's protected areas. So again, an important area biologically, and some of Guatemala's most significant Mayan sites, including Tikal and Yaksha.
Hey, excuse me, Dean. I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
We're getting some distortion from your microphone, and there's not a lot I can do about it on my end. Whatever you can do to just speak slowly and clearly,
Okay.
I think will help a little bit.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, let me know if I need to change it up again. But yeah, so again, Guatemala, it has Guatemala's most significant Mayan sites, including Tikal and Yaksha. And again, this was the center of the Mayan civilization. And here, after the Amazon, it's the largest expanse of tropical forest in Latin America. Again, the importance of this area in terms of climate change and climate change adaptation, carbon storage, it's pretty significant. So that it's divided into 3 areas, which I'll show you a map in a minute here, but 40% is in what's called a multi-use zone dedicated to concessions. And these concessions are the areas that the communities manage. And that's about 2 million acres that these communities are managing. Then the total area of the Maya Biosphere Reserve is about 5 million acres. Again, emphasizing the importance biologically. This is a map of that area and it shows the different zones. So the multiple use zone, you can see over here are kind of the crosshatched green, yellow areas. Those are the concessions run by communities. There's 2 concessions that are also held by private concessionaires, companies that harvest and process timber. There is a core zone that is, those are parks and protected areas. And interestingly enough, we'll talk about this later, is that there's actually more deforestation in the core zone, the protected areas, than there is in these the concessions. And then the 3rd zone is the buffer zone. This is an area to buffer it from outside influences, which is agriculture and livestock production, and pretty degraded in many cases. So that's an area where a lot of work is going on to convert that to more sustainable systems. So the concessions, I'll explain a little bit about them. It was a policy experiment of the Guatemalan government, I would say. Traditionally, and this happens in Latin America, throughout the world, governments will provide a concession to a private company to harvest timber, a certain amount of timber in a certain area. But historically, that has always been private companies. So in Guatemala, this was actually part of the peace accords back in the late 90s. They introduced this idea of having community concessions, and the communities were very involved in making this work. But this does allow communities to manage forest areas and extract and sell timber and non-timber forest products, as long as they do it sustainably. And I think that's an important point. They have to form an association, folks within the community, and they will request a concession from the government. The concession is granted by the government, and then they have a 25-year lease for natural resource extraction. Again, if they sustainably manage the forest. They have to maintain the Forest Stewardship Council certification. The Forest Stewardship Council certification is probably one of the premium forest certifications in the world. It was started in the late 90s, I think, but fairly robust. If you want to be certified, you have to apply. The FSC will come out, they'll do an evaluation of your forest, tell you, and this is it's social, economic, and environmental evaluation. And if there are any problems with the area, your plan and the way you plan to do that, they will ask the community to make changes to adjust so they meet the requirements. And then once it's that certification is granted, there are annual audits, and every 5 years they have to create a new sustainable management plan. They're fairly rigorous. So that was kind of the context, both kind of socially and that this area of Guatemala we're talking about. So I want to talk about the ecopalms, a little bit background and issues, the development of the market, impacts of the program, which are environmental and social justice, and then that collaboration that I mentioned between private, public, and NGO sector partners. So this is a lot of the work we do is with non-timber forest products, and there has been this interest in the development community for a while, looking at ways, we have all these forest areas that we want to preserve as forests. They often have people, communities within those areas. So initially a lot of the conservation organizations, it's, well, let's fence them off, guard them, and we'll keep people out. Most organizations have changed their focus, and now they're looking for ways to work with communities to manage these areas, to ensure that those communities are generating benefits, improving their livelihoods. And then the conservation comes along with that. So there was that interest. They looked at the non-timber forest products as income and employment for generation for rural and urban communities. And it complements other forest values. One of the interesting things in Guatemala, they have good timber. They have mahogany, they have Spanish cedar, which are both valuable species on the global market. So they do well with timber, but that season is only about 3 months of the year. So in 3 months, they do very well, but then there aren't other income generating opportunities associated with the timber market. So that's when the non-timber forest products, things like shot day, which is sold year round, not just on Palm Sunday, come in, and they provide this important source of cash income for communities where they don't have a lot of options to generate that cash income. So this really complements nicely the timber production. So again, these are palms of the genus Commanderea. They're traded in the world floral market. About 600 million fronds are sold annually for a wholesale value about $60 to $100 million. And these figures are a little bit old, so that may have changed. They're produced in Guatemala and Mexico primarily. And they're traditionally gathered from natural forest and sold to middlemen. And often those middlemen would take the palms out of the forest, take them to another community where they were sorted and packaged by women in those other communities. So oftentimes the communities where the palm gatherers came from only received whatever they were paid for gathering the palms. We'll talk more about that later. These are the production areas in Guatemala and Mexico. And again, if you look over here, this is the area in Guatemala we're talking about. Oblongata, Commanderea oblongata is up here on the left. That's the one we primarily use for Palm Sunday, but we also use other species. This is, I think it's Edulis. This is also called parlor palm, and a palm that you often see in interior decorating. You know, if you buy a potted palm at a garden store, it's often this palm. And one of the advantages of these palms and why they're so important is they grow in the shade of the natural forest. So if they have a value, they're growing in the shade of the forest, they do add value to the forest. So people preserve the forest to maintain those palm populations. They're gathered primarily by men, brought in these pictures you can see on their backs. They use horses, mules, pickup trucks to bring them in. But oftentimes in the areas in Guatemala anyway, they're doing this in the wet season, and those roads are not in very good shape. So it's not an easy process. So the sorting and packaging, the fronds come in from the field. They're taken to these warehouses where women are the primary workers that do the sorting and selecting only the best palms, and then packaging of the palms. So they take about 20 fronds, they put them in what's called a bunch. And then those are put together in a roll of 30 bunches, so about 600 palm fronds. And then those are transported to wherever, in the US. They would come into the US. This is how our partners probably get them in Florida and or the Twin Cities. This is the market chain using kind of Minnesota as an example. So they're gathered down here in Mexico and Guatemala. They're transported by plane, boat, used to be by truck, but they've stopped that. It wasn't viable apparently. So boat and plane, and some of them go to Europe, oftentimes going through Florida first or directly. So then from the warehouses, they'll be transported probably by truck to, in our case, Minneapolis, the Twin Cities, and then they're distributed about a day out from there. So we were asked by the North American Commission for Environmental Cooperation to do a market study of the palms. This is back in 2001. And they wanted to know two things. They wanted to know if this palm could be certified in some way, and also would it be possible to get more money back into the pockets of those folks that were doing the gathering in the communities? And so what was their concern? It was because this was true of a lot of NGOs. They were looking at this palm, which they call Shate in Guatemala. It's found in these biosphere reserve areas in both Mexico and Guatemala, and generally in poor, marginalized local communities, isolated forest communities. There was concern about it being over-harvested in both Guatemala and Mexico. And as I mentioned before, when they were doing, the gatherers were paid by volume. And when they did the sorting and packaging, they were often discarding 50 to 60% of the fronds that came in, just because they didn't meet the quality that the market required. And the palm harvesters didn't earn a lot from the harvest, and were dependent on it. Was there a question?
No,
Okay, thanks.
not yet. There will be some.
Okay, good. Yeah. Yeah. The other thing that was happening in many of these areas is palm populations were lost as there was forest conversion to agriculture and fires that got into the forest. And they would destroy the palm populations, and it'd take about 10 years for them to recover. So again, we were asked to do this market study in 2001 by the North American Commission for Environmental Cooperation. And what that showed is this was a market that was kind of in decline. These palms were used a lot in funerals and weddings, but the taste had changed a little bit. They were using other things. But the church market for Palm Sunday was pretty steady. So we recommended that that be pursued because it was a steady market, but also because of the social and environmental justice issues that we were working with. And at that time also, a lot of churches had started buying fair trade coffee. So this was a concept very close to that. The collaborators met in Mexico in 2003. That was the CEC, the university, some of the NGOs we worked with, communities, and then agencies from both the Guatemalan and Mexican governments to talk about this. Parallel to this, Rainforest Alliance asked us to set up meetings with Continental Floral Greens to see if they could set up direct sales from Continental, from the communities to Continental, so it wouldn't be going through middlemen. And then, as this evolved, we did a pilot sale in 2005, and we worked in 5 states, I think, about 22 congregations, and about 5,000 palm fronds. And so at this point, myself and one of my graduate students did all the sending the palms out. So I had a student that took care of the local deliveries, and then got some sent to Massachusetts and some to Wisconsin. And I took off on a Thursday evening and got to North Dakota, spent the night, and then spent the next day delivering palms. I got home at 3 a.m. on Saturday morning before Palm Sunday, laid down for a couple hours, got up again, and delivered the last box to a pastor that was extremely worried that he wouldn't have palms for Palm Sunday in Sandstone up by Duluth. So we decided that was not sustainable. So we had worked with Hermes Floral. It was just around the corner from the university here on Larpenteur. And so Don Hermes, the president of the company, said, well, give us a call a couple of months before Palm Sunday next week. We can help you out. And that was just made all the difference in the world. So they took care of the deliveries. They worked with FedEx, and that allowed us to expand, this market and our ability to deliver the palms greatly. But at the same time, in that period, 2006 to 2008, we were still receiving orders at the university. So we broke the forest resources fax machine. I had students working with me that were taking the orders and delivering to Hermes. So then in 2009, Hermes set up a program for online ordering, and that was a huge benefit. That it does demonstrate again those partnerships. They were in the business, they knew what they were doing, they were able to do that, and that took that task away from us, which we welcomed. And we have over this time really tried to pull out more from the actual sales and all that, but yeah, so that worked well. Because we were working for the Commission for Environmental Cooperation, they had press support. And so they were, I think the first year we had the pilot program, we were on most of the television stations in the Twin Cities. This was in 2007, 2 years into the program. And they had a reporter from New York Times that went down to Mexico and then wrote this article about the palms. And so this, it ended up on page 3. It was all of page 3 of the New York Times on Palm Sunday. He had hoped we'd be on the front page, but there must have been some international news that kind of pushed us off. But these stories were picked up by the news services, and that helped, let people know about the Palm program as well. So these were the sales. So again, in 2005, about 5,000 francs. 2006, again with the FedEx deliveries, 80,000. 2007, 360,000, and then 580,000. And then by 2014, we were just under 1 million francs. We've stayed there. There's been a little bit of a decline now because of COVID, because churches aren't meeting or weren't meeting during that period. So it's grown well. And I guess the important thing is, when we get close to 1 million, we're providing about $50,000 to these communities every year that they use for social benefits. So if we talk about the program, the emphasis, it's sustainable harvest. And our partners in the NGOs, Pro Natura, large environmental NGO in Mexico, and Rainforest Alliance in Guatemala do the training. There's also international agencies that get involved in that process. The social justice, for every farm that's sold, 5 cents goes directly back to the community. So we tally up how many fronds were sold for Palm Sunday. Continental Floral Greens, the importer, writes a check. We multiply the number of fronds by 5 cents, and then Continental Floral Green writes a check, gets it down to the communities in Guatemala, and then they distribute it according to the production of each community that participated. I mentioned earlier the direct sales from community to importer. That's been very important because now it is a year-round activity, and they've been able to have the direct sales and generate more income because of that, and the employment. I think the employment for women was something that never existed. They do the sorting and packaging, and then the social benefits for the community. So those are the things we're looking at now. I have more information on that. So again, this demonstrates, let's go. Yeah, this was the initial way that the palms were harvested and then processed and distributed, to the U.S., Europe, and also Central America. And now a lot of this work up here in this part of the value chain is done in the communities, and that's what's created the jobs. It also actually allowed them to negotiate better prices for the palms. They are labeled. I don't think they've done this for a couple of years, but this was a label they would put on every bunch of 20 palms that kind of said, these are from the Selva Maya communities in Guatemala. The native communities of Washington and Carmelita are supported by Rainforest Alliance, the Non-Traditional Products Exporters Association of Guatemala, and the U.S. Agency for International Development. That does show that they are certified. So the reduced waste, again, these pictures show what it used to look like. After they got done sorting the palms, you'd have all these palms on the ground that would just be cleared out and dumped somewhere. They probably provide organic matter, but there are also palms that could have stayed in the forest and supported the population of palms there. So here they're talking about selection with the project. These are from Rainforest Alliance. But the guy on the left there is Jim Everett. He was the son of the founder of Continental Floral Greens. And he and his colleagues went down to Guatemala when we started this process to train the women how to do the sorting to meet the needs of the US market and his European markets as well. And also the shot to gatherers, the shoteros, what need to be gathered from the forest and the ones that would not meet the requirements of the market. So this has lowered the waste and it's provided employment for women. So this is a list, again, these figures are a little bit old, but it gives you the idea that they talk here about selection. It used to be outside of the community, now it's women in the community, wasted fronds, 40 to 60%, and now 5 to 15%. Actually, that's usually well below 10%. Prices about doubled. They talk about a green market, with the churches. The benefit to the collector has doubled, and then the benefit to the sorters. And this is percentage of gross proceeds from the sales, but it created these jobs that were never there before. And it's also provided management positions for these women that work with the palms. So there's a gender focus, increased business capacity, new sources of employment, and promotion of greater gender equality in the community. Talking to these women, it was interesting. They were telling me that when they first started this whole process, there was usually a man that was managing the women that were sorting and packaging. And the women decided that they could do it better than the man, so they kicked them out. And they did take over that process. So, there's some empowerment there too. They're complying with environmental laws. And I think this is important. A lot of what happens in the forest there can be illegal. Now, under these new programs, they're complying with the laws. That means they're paying the taxes they need to. And that money usually goes back into the funds that are used for conservation in Guatemala. So I think, it's another important process. This is a slide from a presentation made in a conference last November. And this is a woman from Rainforest Alliance and talking about the 20 years of experience in the Biosphere Reserve. If you look at these two maps, the top map is of deforestation. It might be hard to make it out, but if you look at it, these areas that are brown, yellow, and red, that's where the deforestation is happening. These areas up here that are crosshatched, those are the community concessions, and it's not happening there, at least even if it is very smaller scale. And a lot of these areas where the deforestation is happening are parks and preserves. The map on the bottom is an image showing heat points. So where fires are burning, and pretty much the same phenomena there that, where the community concessions are, you don't see fires burning. And actually they use money from Palm Sunday sales to invest in equipment for the men that go out and fight fires. They have the snake bite kits is a good example, plus whatever they need for that, and training as well. So part of it does go into the forest conservation protection, and then a lot of it goes into social benefits as well. So this was just kind of showing some of the things they do with the money. They do some reforestation with palms in areas that have been degraded. And then there's educational materials for kids. They have a health center now since this all started, and they keep that stocked, and some of the money that the palms generate is used for those health centers. And again, just more of that with the schools, the health centers, and the folks that are involved in the different activities. It's interesting, they provide these kind of kits for the men, those chateros, that go out and gather the palms. And so they'll have hammocks, the snake bite kits, first aid kits. So it also contribute to the supporting these chateros after they retire. So again, the partners, we've got the environmental NGOs that are interested in environmental protection, but also social justice. And as I mentioned, that's been a change over time. They understand that if we want to conserve these areas, we have to have a good relationship with the communities there. And they do want to help the folks, the faith-based organizations, the stewardship and social justice issues, government agencies, better control and protection, income from the fees. So this works well for them as well. The private sector, Continental Floral Greens, Hermes, they see it as a way to maybe get some new market share, a new product, but they are definitely interested in the social justice issues. We often think of companies as just being profit driven, but Continental has a long-term relationship with communities in Guatemala and Mexico. They want to help the communities. They provided loans, and Hermes Floral as well. Don Hermes is in the warehouse on Saturdays, packing palms that are going to churches. So they're very proud of what they're doing, and they feel good about being able to help these communities in Guatemala. For the university, for me, it's really a good way to look at can we develop ways to use the forest, generate income and jobs, and also improve livelihood. So we get conservation and the livelihood improvement combined. And so we've had students from other universities that have done work on this as well. It's been kind of nice for me. We're able to attract really high quality students. When you start talking about these projects, they get excited because of what has happened in Guatemala. So in summary, the Eco Palms project, it does empower communities to address poverty, health, education, equity. It promotes conservation and restoration of important forest resources. They've calculated using UN standards that they will reduce emissions of about 37 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent over the next 30 years through avoided deforestation, because they're protecting and conserving the forest. And that's not even mentioning the millions of tons of carbon that are sequestered in those large forest areas. And then it addresses the environmental and social justice. I'm play this quick. This is a clip from a woman in one of the communities that works with Shate.
Es de mucho beneficio poder hacer esta actividad, pues desde el 2007 formo parte del grupo de seleccionadoras de la cooperativa Carmelita y sí me ha ayudado mucho lo que yo gano en bodega de Shate, me ayuda para contribuir al hogar ahora que ya pues tengo mi hogar, ¿verdad? Mis hijos. Se beneficia, empezamos desde el chatero, que es el que recolecta en el bosque, pues se beneficia un arriero, se benefician las mujeres en Shate, otro joven que es el que empaca y sobre todo pues el bosque, ¿verdad? Porque antes no había un manejo sostenible como lo está teniendo ahora el bosque. Antes la gente cortaba Shate, tal vez a veces hasta mal manejo a las plantas, ¿verdad? Pues agradecer a las iglesias, ¿verdad? Que anualmente pues hacen un pedido especial en la cual mandan una bonificación de ese pedido, ¿verdad? Ese pedido viene a contribuir tanto a educación como a salud y también viene a fortalecer el fondo de los chateros, ¿verdad? Pues agradecerle en nombre del Consejo de Administración y de la Cooperativa Carmelita y decirlo así de todas las concesiones que formamos parte de ACOFOP, ese gesto que hacen de amabilidad en reconocer el gran trabajo que hacen los chateros dentro de la Reserva de la Biosfera Maya. Muchas gracias. Es de
Yeah, now we can take questions.
All right, thank you, Dean. Thank you. That was, and I've heard you talk about this many times, and I learned a lot. Thank you.
Oh, good.
And you look good in a tie. I'm not sure I've ever seen you in a tie before.
Thank you.
There is a question that came in over the Q&A already, and anybody else who would like to ask a question in the room, you can line up or somebody can take the microphone. And if you are watching from home, please put your questions in the Q&A. So the first one the one that has come in so far is about that FSC certification. And the question is that a branch of the Guatemalan government or an independent certifying body? And where does their authority come from?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's a independent certifying body, and they do that just because, you know, make sure it is independent, and they are able to maintain that independence as they certify for us. So it's you know, they work around the world. It started out in Mexico and Germany, and I think the headquarters are in Germany. We have I think the US headquarters are here in Minnesota right now. We have a lot of certified forests in Minnesota, both through FSC, and then there's another Sustainable Forestry Initiative, SFI, which is similar.
And I know I've noticed it on things like toilet paper and paper towels, that this FSC marker is tissue paper is, so it's something that we could participate as consumers as well, right?
Right, yeah, and I think maybe to add to that, you know, Rainforest Alliance has their little frog that often appears in a lot of different consumer goods as well. And they have different, so they do it for coffee, cocoa, you know, chocolate, but it serves the same purpose. I see there's another question there.
Yeah, and that what you just said, I think, leads into this question. Jim Lenfesty says, are there any other sustainable forest products that can accomplish similar benefits? And you just talked about cocoa and coffee and things. So
yeah,
what
very
else
good question. Yeah, that is a good question. And there are. So we're working with another product. It's tree seed called Ramon. There's a company in California that they're the major importer of this seed, and they make a coffee substitute. They're kind of the woman is a tea designer, and she makes different beverages and teas, coffees, but she makes this coffee substitute, and that's probably, she says that's her #1 product that she sells. So the Ramon, we're trying to expand the use of that, develop a flour that could be used in baked goods. But yeah, in our work in Guatemala, we're really trying to expand the number of products that we can get into the market, into these better markets that pay well, and that provide rewards for these systems that are more environmentally and socially sustainable and just. So they sell pimienta, which is allspice actually, it's honey. And so we're trying to find those markets that do provide a reward for the, you know, those types of products that can be certified and have what we call the environmental and social attributes.
Yeah, and that company you're talking about in California is called Teechino, Teechino. If anybody would like to try it, I buy things from them based on conversations with Dean around this Ramon seed and trying to support the use of that and build that market. We have a question in the room, and then we have a couple other online questions.
Dean had a question about the palms themselves. You mentioned a certain species. How high do they get? I mean, are these short ones, or do they have to climb a huge thing? And the second part of the question is, how about the transportation of these palm leaves? What's its carbon impact? Thank you.
Yeah, two good questions. Actually, they're lower growing palm. It's not like thinking about coconut palms or the palms you might see in Miami. So they're relatively easy to reach by the chateros. I forget, the second part of the question was, the footprint. So that's a really good question.
The carbon of the transportation.
Yeah, we had that question come up, and it was out east somewhere. So right now we have a team of students that are looking at the carbon footprint. And, you know, we expect that, you know, if you think about, I don't know if you remember those pictures, but the 600 fronds were a roll that was maybe 5-6 inches in diameter. That's about for 3 churches. So, and they're transported by boat, but again, we're doing the calculations. We feel like, you know, it's an issue that we need to address, obviously. But when you think about, the avoidance of 36 million tons of carbon equivalent emissions, that it will probably be positive. And what we've said before, I know some people asked us when we started out, well, if some of these palm harvests are destroying the forest, should we stop buying them? And we say just the opposite would happen. Again, they add value to the forest, you stop buying them, and then that value is taken away. And there's less incentive to maintain the forest.
Thanks, Dean. We have another inside the room question. Bill.
Yeah, I had an experience at another church a few years ago, imported palms for Palm Sunday. And it was rather shocking, I guess I would say, because they were as yellow could be. And I've never experienced that since then. I have no idea where they came from. But my question is kind of a follow-up to that issue. And maybe you addressed it, but I didn't hear it. Is there a storage period? Because I can't imagine them doing a rush harvesting, just for Palm Sunday. Or do they do that, rush harvest?
They actually do. That's an excellent question. And it's one of the things we talk about, because we really have to coordinate, the harvesting and then getting them to customers extremely well, because they've got about a 2-week window from the time they're harvested to get them to the final destination. And, it's been interesting. We use FedEx, and depending on when Palm Sunday falls every year, if we have a warm streak, that often leads to some problems. So, but it's something that, our colleagues, in the floral and shipping industry are aware of, and they do a good job. And, we've emphasized that, when those palms leave Guatemala, they should be in good shape. And so they've done some work getting refrigeration units. It does happen. I won't say it doesn't, but generally what we've done in the past is, if a church had ordered palms, they came in moldy or whatever, we would overnight palms to them. And we usually make sure that they're, so there'd be time to make sure they got palms in time for Palm Sunday.
That happened here the first year we ordered them, but it wasn't on Eco Palms. We didn't receive them right. And they wilted between reception and Sunday. So that was on us. But
yeah, it is interesting. It's we've put it on the outside of the box and the inside of the box in emails, but in a church, it's often different people are involved. So, but that care once they arrive, like you say, is really important.
we have a few more questions and only a few more minutes, Dean. So this one, I think you can answer quickly. Why is Spanish cedar so valuable? You mentioned it earlier.
Yeah, it's been one of the 2 species that really throughout Latin America that has been valuable. It's a good wood. It has, it's like our cedar, that it repels insects and is easy to work. It just, it always has been a good species and a valuable one.
Great. And then can you talk this is a big question that has, you'll need a quick answer, but can you talk a bit more about the benefits of employing women, and do they receive the payment directly? And then we have a question in the room, and then we'll probably have to end.
Okay. Yeah, I think they do. They receive the payment directly, and they manage these enterprises, the Shate warehouse. So, they're empowered, they're getting training and management of a business. So they're pretty impressive. We've had them in the US talking to different folks, and, they tell you the way it is. And, but again, I think it's been empowering. They in turn, use that money to put their kids through school and make sure they get a good education. So it has that other impact as well.
Thanks, Dean.
Yeah.
And then Bryce.
Just a couple of questions. Is the management primarily on a cooperative basis, number one? And number two, approximately how many people would have employment over time? And then is there work on an annual basis, or is this just seasonal?
Yeah. So this is work that, in these cooperative, it is cooperative based. So it's a community coming together. They have different activities. So, for part of the year, some of it might be working in timber. Another part of the year, they might be working with shate. Tourism is becoming more important. So, but they rotate that. They try and make sure that everybody gets an equal chance to work in tourism. They sign up for that. And that's the value of the non-timber forest products of shate, especially that we do have that year-round market. And it's always been an important source of cash income, that if they need it, they can go out, harvest shate, bring it in. There are people they can sell it to. Now it's the community, and that supports a lot of purchases during the year. If it were just a few months, that's tough.
One last question that I have is there a ceiling on how much can be harvested? Like, are we going to reach a point where it will no longer be sustainable?
Yeah, actually, that's all built into their management plans. So they know how many, for example, they will say, I think there's one species that they can harvest 3 leaves every 3 months. So the forest is divided into blocks. They do this with timber too. So, this week they're in one block and they know how much they can harvest from that. They've done the inventory. Then they'll move on to another one. So they've, done the calculations. So it's really set up to be managed sustainably. There's always the danger when you have a sudden increase in demand. But again, they've done a good job of setting up the management so that would not happen, that you would not get that type of over harvesting.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean. And we are going to clap for you.
Thank you.
We appreciate all that you have done to make this happen. And we've been a beneficiary of this product for 4 years now, I think. And we bought them even during the pandemic, even though we weren't going to use them, just to participate in the economic justice of that purchase. So thank you, Dean. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for those of you who are at home. Please join us again next week. Nope, not next week, because it's Easter. And we won't have a forum next Sunday. And then please join us on the 24th for our Earth Sunday celebration.